So you finally did it. You saved up a few $1,000s and you're about to hit the pay now button on that long travel kit you've been eyeing up. Everybody on social media is doing it and you don't want to miss out on the fun. In fact, I don't blame you. Long travel kits are the best way to get the most out of both off-road and on-road performance. But the truth is, there is a lot more to it than just the long travel kit itself. So today, I'm going to break down every possible cost with building out a long travel vehicle so you don't regret your decision later on. Spoiler alert, the long travel kit itself is actually the cheap part. Beyond the front long travel kit, you need a lot of supporting mods in order to be able to properly use it. And you also can't forget about your rear suspension. A lot of people buy long travel kits expecting to immediately be able to go through big whoops or send it off a big jump, but that can't be farther from the truth. You're going to need to completely revamp the rear suspension on the vehicle as well, and I'll be going over the full build plans for this vehicle at the latter end of this video. In the meantime, let's start out with the build cost that goes into the front suspension of this vehicle. At the top of the screen, I'll have two prices listed. The price on your left is going to be the cost if you were to install everything yourself, while the cost on the right of the screen is going to be the cost if you were to have a shop install it. For the purpose of this video, let's assume that we have a shop doing an install rate of $100 per hour. First off, let's start off with a long travel kit. On this vehicle, I have a BTF Fabrications long travel kit, which increases the track width by 4.5 inches per side. These long travel kits start at a price of $2,850, but of course you're going to want it powder coated, which adds another $150, and for a pair of the custom CV axles that came with this kit, you're looking at another $1,100. Next up is your coilovers. On my vehicle, I went with the Locked Off-Road 2.5-inch diameter coilovers with remote reservoirs, and for those, we are looking at a price of $750 each. If you're having a shop install this for you, you're probably looking at about 8 hours of labor, which is another $800 on top. At this point, you have the main product installed, but there's still a lot of supporting mods you need to do before you can properly send it. Bump stops and limit straps are an absolute necessity if you want to be able to use your suspension without completely destroying it. My hydraulic bump stops from Locked Off-Road cost me $480 for the pair of them, and to have a shop install them for you, you're looking at about 2 hours of labor for them to fabricate some mounts and weld them onto the car. To prevent your suspension from overextending itself, you'll need a proper set of limit straps, which aren't too expensive at about $35 each, but you'll also need an adjustable clevis at $42 each and a weld-on clevis mount at $10 each. Having a shop install this for you shouldn't be too bad at about 1 more additional labor hour. You should be good to go now, right? Well, not so fast. Just because your suspension can handle the hits doesn't mean everything else can. There are a few notable weak points that need to be taken care of. The most important is your spindle. Recently, one of my customers purchased a set of heavy-duty spindle gussets off of my website, and the day before they got around to installing it, they ended up breaking off the spindle at the top where the upper ball joint mounts. Breaking spindles is a pretty common occurrence if you frequently bottom out your suspension, especially if you don't have a proper bump stop setup. Spindle gusset kits are only about $80, and if you're having a shop install it for you, you're looking at about 3 hours of labor. And finally, the last big area to upgrade is your strut tower. These frequently break on people because of how thin the sheet metal is. You can either weld on a reinforcement, or you can do what I did and add a bypass shock mount. The bypass shock mounts come with a super heavy duty plate on top to distribute the load on your strut tower, and the forces from your suspension compressing is now distributed between 2 shocks that each have their own mounts. A bypass shock mount is another $450, and the bypass shocks themselves from a brand like Locked Off-Road is $1,700 for the pair. If you're having a set of bypass shocks installed, you're looking at about 6 hours of labor to install it, and if you need a place to install it, hit me up because I know exactly where you can get that done. Wow, just saying all these numbers out loud is making my head hurt, and it really puts into perspective just how much can go into this. But in fact, there are still a lot more things you can do, such as Heim steering upgrades, lower uniball conversions, chromoly axles, and cam tab gussets, but those aren't super critical for you if you really want to be able to send it, so I'm not going to include that in the running total. If you've done everything described up to this point, you've pretty much completed your front-end suspension long travel build. But what's the point of going this far if you don't upgrade the rear suspension to match? This is the point where I see a lot of people stopping because it gets a lot more expensive than they first realized. I see some people adding a set of shocks and springs to the rear and calling it good, while others go as far as to add a 3-link, maybe some outboard mounted shock mounts, but then you're still stuck with the dilemma of having the stock width rear axle. You'll notice on this vehicle, the stock rear axle is significantly narrower than the front, even with the 1¼ inch wheel spacers on each side. In the next couple of months, I'll be completely overhauling the rear suspension, and right now, I'm going to give you a full price breakdown of everything that's to come. There's a lot of different ways to upgrade your rear suspension in a much cheaper way than what I'm about to describe, but I decided to go all out on my rear suspension build so later on I don't end up regretting my decisions. The rear suspension can be broken down into 3 parts. You have your axle, a link kit, and your coilover mounting kit. First, let's start off with the axle build. I'll be using a Trail Gear Rock Assault 9 to match the front long travel in width. These axle housings are really awesome because they come in a various few widths, and they also come with 35 spline chromoly axle shafts for only $1,700. For the axle housing, I'll be using Trail Gear's Dana 60 unit hubs, which is a little expensive at $1,100 for a pair of them, and I'll also need their fully loaded disc brake kit for $1,400. I also spent about $250 on a brake line flare tool, straightener, bender, brake line fittings, and about 25 feet of brake line. To complete the axle assembly, I also purchased a Ford 9-inch diff from East Coast Gear Supply with an ARB locker in it for $2,400. Keep in mind, these are top-of-the-line parts, and you can always reduce your final cost by using something like a first-gen Tundra axle. I actually initially purchased a Tundra axle, but I scrapped it because it's still using the same 8-inch Toyota differential, and it's a little shorter than what I wanted it to be. Next up, your link kit. If you plan on keeping it smog legal like me, you'll need a parallel 3-link kit to maintain the use of your factory gas tank. For superior high-speed handling, you can also do a parallel 4-link, but this requires you to relocate your factory gas tank. You can also do a triangulated 4-link for better articulation in the rocks. You can do this for pretty cheap by buying a universal builder kit and designing all of the geometry yourself, or you can buy a prefabricated and engineered kit from companies like 4-Wheel Underground. I'm going this route because in the end, I know they've dialed in the geometry for better road handling abilities, and it's going to save me dozens of hours of time and headaches in the future. The link kits from 4-Wheel Underground cost about $2,700, and they include all of the vehicle-specific links and mounts to make the install a breeze. The final part to a rear suspension build is in your coilover mounting. On these 4Runners, we have a big dilemma when it comes to mounting a large coilover. In order to mount a large coilover without having the lower shock mount hanging way below the axle, we need to cut into the cab. I really dislike this option because of all the fab work involved, so instead I've decided to go with the all-new 4-Wheel Underground cantilever kit. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a system of mounting your coilover horizontally instead of vertically by taking that vertical axis of movement and translating it to horizontal on a pivot point. This system will keep the coilover out of the cabin, and it'll keep the vehicle family friendly, which is exactly what I need for my application. A cantilever kit, although expensive, is going to save us a ton of time because we don't have to worry about the sheet metal work, and it's going to save us a whole lot of labor hours. The cantilever kit does cost $3,600, but it has another huge benefit being that it has an integrated manual locking sway bar. This saves us another headache of trying to fit in an anti-rock sway bar, and although the cantilever kit has a high upfront cost, it's going to end up at a similar price point than if we were going to mount our coilovers in a traditional way. And lastly, you still need your coilovers and your hydraulic bump stops for about $1,700 and $450 respectively, and to install everything I just described on your rear suspension, you are looking at about 30 hours of labor if you are bringing it to a shop to have them do it for you. So that about sums up the final cost when it comes to building your long travel suspension vehicle. There are definitely a lot of other ways you can do this to make it fit your budget. It really depends on how much of the work you're willing to put in yourself. At the end of the day, we build these vehicles for fun, and you absolutely don't need to spend this much money to get to many of the beautiful places around the world. For 99% of use cases, you really only need a minor lift kit, a good set of tires, and a tent, and you'll be having a better time out there than the majority of the rest of the population. Anyways, if you want to see the rear suspension on this vehicle come to life, make sure to subscribe to the channel down below because the upcoming videos will be all about building the rear suspension to match the front. I'll see you guys next time, and thanks for watching.